All right, let's get this party started. If you can all please, whoever these jokers are back there standing up flapping their lips, maybe they'll sit down so we can get started.
Large social crowd.
They're from the they're still receiving the accolades from their adoring throng from the earlier panel. Anytime, guys. Well, thank you for coming. We were kind of hoping nobody'd show up, so we could just go, out by the pool or something. But honestly, we're glad everybody's here, and we're going to try to make this as informative and entertaining as humanly possible. My name is Andy Horn. I'm a deputy CEO with the County of Imperial. I work on trying to facilitate a lot of the renewable energy projects that have been and are being developed here in Imperial County, along with a few other things that my boss tells me to do. So our goal today is to kind of give you an update on an update. We're in the process of updating the county's alternative energy, and Richard back there, he can correct me, alternative energy / transmission element of the county general plan. And we have a distinguished panel here today to help me, because basically they're going to do all the talking, and luckily for you there's only two of them, so it should be short and sweet, right guys? So let me give you a little brief introduction, and then I'll introduce our two experts here. There they are right there. So you don't need, they need no introduction because they got their names right there on the screen. Let's see, and there we go. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to talk about the update of the geothermal alternative energy and transmission element. There's a key word there that I would like just point out briefly, and that's geothermal. And so when our update, or when our element was last updated, basically the only game in town in terms of renewable energy was geothermal. We know now that there are a wide range of varying technologies being deployed and proposed here in Imperial County. So one of the thoughts, or one of the goals and objectives of what we're trying to accomplish, is to incorporate as many of those that we know about, and even allow for some that we may not know about, at least in general terms, to incorporate that variety of technologies that we know is coming, either here now or coming. I can't even read this thing from here. Where you got a copy of it, don't you? Before I gotta make sure that we know what we're doing here. So we gotta update not only that element, but also the ordinances, the general plan and zoning ordinance. Well, we're not going to do the zoning ordinance. We're going to do the general plan. And then we're also going to look at all the other elements of the general plan to make sure they're consistent with the policy set forth in the renewable energy element. We're doing an EIR to accomplish this, to abide by CEQA. And we're also doing a fairly robust public stakeholder outreach program, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Let's see. You said about this button here. So to give you a little background, what you have there is a map of what's called the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, or DRECP for short. That's Brian's favorite acronym. I say that because he never can remember it, but it's an ambitious effort of state and federal resource agencies to identify areas within Southern California to site renewable energy projects. They've been working on this for, I think it's over 4 years, and they're doing some fairly intensive surveys of the land within that planning boundary. And you can see that Imperial County, almost all of Imperial County, is incorporated in the DRECP area. And the goal is to not only identify areas where renewables could be sited, but also identify potential conservation and mitigation areas where land can be identified to mitigate for the impacts of developing renewables on this ground. Now, when this was originally envisioned or conceived, they were going to concentrate almost entirely on federal and state-owned lands within that boundary. It quickly became obvious, like I say quickly, probably it took them a couple of years, and it meshed with what we were experiencing down here, is that many of these projects are being proposed on private land, which is generally in the purview of the jurisdiction in terms of land use planning of the counties. So they've gotten far more focused on, or far more inclusive of involving the counties more recently in this effort. During this whole period of time when we were experiencing, well, Jim will talk a little bit more about this later, we were experiencing a relatively intense wave of renewable energy project proposal, and we were having to cope with that right here on the ground level. The problem that we had, because of the fact that our general plan element was somewhat dated, it was difficult to try to shoehorn some of these projects into our existing land use plans, and we did not honestly have the resources to accomplish an update or to do an update, especially given the cost. And it's probably going to cost somewhere shy of $1 million to put this whole thing all together. So we lobbied quite intensively over the years to try to find some source of funding to help us in updating our land use policies. We were pretty widely ignored for the most of that time, but more recently, about a year ago, there was some legislation passed in the California state legislature that made some funds available to counties. Originally, it was to be counties within the DRECP, and I think there are 7 of them, to apply for planning grant funds through the California Energy Commission. We did that, and we were successful in getting $700,000, and we are now using that money to hire experts like Brian Mooney and his team of people that are helping us in looking at the maps and what do we call them, opportunities and constraints maps, and then also, of course, the CEQA documentation. So we're in the process of doing that right now. What we hope to accomplish, of course, is to create a better path to success for people who are looking to locate projects here in Imperial County. And Imperial County, there's a map, or at least a part of Imperial County, and that big pink blotch in the middle that you see refers to something called a development focus area, a DFA, under the DRECP nomenclature. And if you look at an overall map, a DFA map, and by the way, I just want to make it very clear, this is one of several alternatives. This is the most impactful, if you will, identifies the most land within Imperial County as a DFA. And there are other alternatives being considered, and then of course in our process we'll be narrowing that down, we think, to identify lands, because as you can see, most of that is almost all of the irrigated area, and because of the tension that's been created between agriculture and the development of some of these projects that we're acutely aware of, we'll probably be looking at areas within the county that we think could be best suitable for energy development without impacting existing uses. We're minimizing the impact to existing uses like agriculture. Plus, we're statutorily required to protect agriculture as a strategic and resource. So, so this gives you an idea of kind of the broad brush of what we are looking at. And you can see there are other shades of colors there. Some of those are BLM lands that have been designated as areas of critical environmental concern. Some of the military lands are identified on there also. Wilderness areas would be in the upper right-hand corner. Those are pretty much off the table. So we're also going to be incorporating and looking at those areas that are going to be set aside basically designated as areas where projects are not likely or very likely not going to be located. We're also going to be doing, as the name of the element hints at, working on identifying transmission corridors, and we're working with IID right now to do that. And with their new plan, their step plan, we need to make sure that we allow for corridors for transmission. So that's kind of the general background. Let me just say there's also a second round of grants that we're in the process of applying for that will hopefully allow us to update our conservation open space element to better define those areas where we think, habitat areas around the Salton Sea, for instance, and areas that are, somewhat sensitive from either a cultural or biological standpoint might be located, or other uses with like the military uses. Let me just point out something to you. If you see, originally, can I go back here? Yeah. If you look at that map right there, you see the Salton Sea. It's not clear on here, but the Salton Sea was excluded from the DRECP planning area. We talked them into, because as those of you who might have heard the panel this morning talk about this, we wanted to make sure that they incorporated at least the known geothermal resource area around the Salton Sea, which takes in most of that area of the playa that's likely to be exposed for future development into the DRECP planning area. So that's why there's that cutoff there in the southeast corner of the sea that will allow for us to take into account the fact that there could be a lot of potential for development around the Salton Sea and what is currently under the Salton Sea. So that's my brief introduction, and now I'll introduce Jim Minnick, who is the County Interim Planning Director. Jim has a lot of experience, something like 75 years. No, I tried to add all these numbers up here. It's like 16 years of experience here at the county helping. All right. Go ahead, Jim. Take it away.
Well, Andy pretty much said everybody's presentation, so we can go home, right, Brian? Okay. My part of this presentation, first of all, thank you for coming. Thank you for staying. Thank you for not going to the bar that's being set up right now. After this panel, you may need to go to the bar. That said, my presentation is going to focus on how we got to where we are as a land use, as the county in its land use process. Over 100 years ago, we had pioneers come out here, and they came out here for water, sun, and land. And within a very short order, they developed one of the region's largest agricultural areas that produces agriculture year-round. Then, right after the World War II, during the 1940s and 1950s, most of us who are baby boomers, or in Andy's case, were probably fought in the war, come home, and they, as you know, the economy started to take a huge jump forward, and all the sectors became really, housing, everything. During this time, the county also experienced something not unique. There you go. To other places. We actually had a number of oil drilling companies come here, and for 20 years they drilled for oil. All they found was steam and really, really hot water. So they left wells and they just went away. Then in the 1970s, a guy by the name, or a lot of number of people, but one of the key pioneers, his name was Buck McCabe of Magma Power, came and decided, you know what, I can do something with that power. And in the early 70s, they started developing the geothermal industry that we have today. The county, in conjunction with this, saw the potential for this renewable energy, and by 1977, we developed the state's first geothermal element. We also did a number of master plan EIRs, and we did what are called KGRAs. From that point forward, we progressed with a geothermal, as Andy said, a geothermal approach to renewable energy. By the 1980s, we started to see things like biomass. We approved several biomass plants that are still here to this day. Not very big, the 15 megawatt plants compared to what we do these days. However, they were here, so we did those in the 1980s. By the 1990s, we started to revitalize some of our regulations. The geothermal element continued to progress. We've updated it, what, 4 times? I think 4 times. We updated it again in the 1990s, and in the 90s, we started to look at things like solar. We actually started with our solar stuff prior to 1998. We included it as residential and commercial. What we did not foresee was the commercial scale, or the large-scale solar that we do today. So by the 2000s, we were thinking we're doing pretty good. We have our ordinances in place. We have our general plan in place. We're allowing these renewables. We've seen biomass. We've seen geothermal. By then, we had already processed 15 geothermal plants. Everything was going along good. All of a sudden, solar showed up, and not the way we expected it. From 2010 to 2014, we processed. You stole the clicker. I got to go to the next slide. Yeah. There we go. Over a 4-year period, we processed 36 CUPs. CUPs are conditional use permits, mentioned in the last panel. Of those CUPs, they were for geothermal, solar, and wind power. I don't need. I can read from there. Thank you, Andy. Appreciate it. Okay. During this time, we did 26 EIRs and a number of other types of documents. To kind of put that in perspective, on average, we would do 1 to 2 EIRs a year. So 26 of them in 4 years was quite extensive, especially when we have a staff of less than 40 employees, of which we only had 6 planners. So the planners worked really hard for the past 4 years to do something amazing, in my opinion. By the time 2014 came around, we had already processed 1,800 megawatts of power, of which we have on the ground 50% of that already. We already have 900 megawatts of power on the ground, over 500 on the grid itself. Geothermal, we are up to 21 plants, or over 500 megawatts of geothermal. And of course, the wind, you guys who come from San Diego saw the 256 megawatt wind project that we've done. The slide here shows a total of 2,271 megawatts. That is including not just what we've already approved and started the building process, but also the 3 plants we have that we're processing right now, 3 solar projects, which are about another 365 megawatts. To put it in a different perspective, it's 22,000 acres or 34 square miles of solar panels. So that's larger than any of our cities in the county. So in 4 years, we've basically titled an entire city of solar. This is a shot of all of the little places throughout the county that we've adopted as solar projects. This is kind of, I don't expect you to be able to read all that, but that's part of the list of solar projects that we worked on over the past 4 years. This is a blow up of the north end of the solar projects. It doesn't look like a lot in relationship to over 500,000 acres of farmland, but it is quite substantial when you get out on the field and you look at these things. This is the south end. This is probably a little better presentation for the solar. Of course, they're clustered around the Ivy Solar substation, or Ivy substation, and the 2 500 kV lines. So it's kind of interesting that the pioneers that started this 100 years ago were looking at water, looking at sun, and looking at land. Today, over 100 years later, we're still looking at water, solar, and land, but we're looking at it in a different way. Our challenge, though, for the next wave of this is to find a balance between the original pioneers' uses of the properties and the lands and the new wave of pioneers, which are most of you in the solar and renewable energy industries. Thank you. Brian?
This is one of our, as soon as I can figure out this. Other way. It's always good to be good at technology. and there's windmills. Let me ask this question very briefly. So I've been hired by the County of Imperial, and it's not the first time. First of all, can everybody hear me? I want to make sure that I'm clear and succinct. Secondly, how many know what a general plan is? Raise your hand. Okay, is it important to you developing renewable energy projects? And I hear a, yeah, amen. That's right, I like that. So a little bit, very, very little bit about my background. I've been doing this since the 70s. I was part of teams writing the first general plans in the County of San Diego. I also was retained by the County of Imperial in 1992 or so to rewrite this general plan, which included the geothermal alternative energy and transmission line update. In 2006, I was brought back again to update that element one more time, and somebody came up to me recently and said, hey, this is a planning job. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, the American Planning Association recognized the County of Imperial for its forward thinking. So we've been brought back to look at this one more time, but looking at it this specific time for all of this new technology. What I want to make this presentation is really also a chance to incorporate you into this process, for me to introduce myself to you and for me to seek your help. Because what my job is ultimately to try to find locations, and we're talking about large locations, where I basically can site renewable energy projects on a broader base than just solar, wind, and geothermal, a broader base. I was very interested in looking at the concentrated solar presentation I heard yesterday, just an hour ago in a panel next door. And so it gets me thinking about it. So I'm going to look at all of you as hopefully being introduced, and you can come to me and give me some more information in relationship to what you need to site your projects, biofuels, all of these aspects. Now, how are we doing this? I want to go back and talk again about the general plan. The general plan is the constitution for land use for the county in California. When people say, oh, I can't do business in California, it's perceived that our regulations, and it starts with the general plan, which basically, in essence, tells the Board of Supervisors, this is how you're going to approve projects. The next key element is the California Environmental Quality Act, the environmental laws that ultimately cite it. One of the key aspects of Andy's first part of the presentation is that Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, which is an agreement between the state of California, the Department of California Fish and Wildlife, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There's a lot of endangered species here on how you'll permit and process projects. So this general plan and the environmental studies ultimately are going to try to incorporate it to make it easy for you renewable energy developers to build projects. That's really what this is all about. It's a way to hopefully make it less here in Imperial Valley restrictive than it is in other areas. Now, at the same time, we don't want to destroy those endangered species. We don't want to substantially impact those habitats. So this is the study and the process we're going through. Very first, we're developing a series of baseline environmental studies and baseline studies about the renewable energy information. That's where you can help me. I'm kind of going to go through roughly what they are. We're reviewing the renewable energy strategies in relationship, and not just the strategies, but also the transmission. One of the good parts of this, by the way, is we're one of 4 counties, Inyo, San Bernardino, and San Luis Obispo, that are working on this, so we're sharing information of where we're going with it. And so looking at energy strategies, and then also tying into those other areas like SDG&E and selling to the larger grid. We're reviewing the existing energy legislation and policies and seeing what are the key issues that we need to be looking at. For instance, it may be that we have to be looking at the tax incentive issues, and we need to see how that fits and can help encourage things. And there may even be some opportunity to look at some form of permit costs, tax issues. I heard my good friend Tom DeBose talking about making it easier and fees, and so that's one of the things we're looking at also. Then what we're going to do is we're going to develop a revised general plan element. But we're not just going to focus on that one element. We are going into all of the other elements to make sure there's a consistency and a conformancy throughout the whole area. and then prepare the CEQA document. If at all possible, that CEQA document, which will be either a master environmental impact report or a programmatic environmental impact report, can lessen the requirements of you coming in at a project level and maybe even eliminate some requirements for pilot projects. And I'm a very big believer in going ahead with pilot projects. By the way, a key part of this in relationship with the grant is also public participation. Public participation is, in essence, one of the things we're doing today, is doing part of this conference. We're trying to get the word out that we're doing it so you can come back and you know who to contact in a relationship. We also, March 27th, we're holding public meetings in the south and the north part of the county in relationship to asking communities. We have a technical advisory committee, and we've asked them to go out and seek their things. Now, there are competing interests here, as you'll see as we go on. So we have you as the renewable energy experts, and we want to seek your input, but then we also have the Sierra Club. You know, we also have the military, which, by the way, we have to make sure that as we're pursuing key issues with the renewable energy industry, we aren't hurting ourselves with some of the other areas that are key for the economy of Imperial Valley. Obviously, we have agriculture, and that's another aspect. But so we have a very detailed public participation process. According to the grant, we will be finished roughly by March 2015. So that's going to be the cornerstone of when we're finished. What are we studying? In a relationship to, and we really have just completed this phase, we're taking all of the existing studies that have been done for the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, that have been done for the newest study with the military, that have been done for the past general plan, that have been done on all of your individual projects, and we basically are combining it and looking at all of these issues, from aesthetics and glare to population and housing, geology and soils, to form this technical analysis background that will be included in the overall program. You will also notice that we are looking at the potential renewable energy and generation suitability areas. That's one of the key things, and we're going through kind of a statistical analysis. You may never have heard of Ian McHarg, was a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, and back in the 60s and early 70s, and it's been adapted now to GIS, developed this concept of doing overlays of these constraints so we can start to see where the most suitable area to develop whatever you want to develop is. And so that's, in essence, the process we're kind of going through in relationship to the baseline analysis. This baseline analysis, by the way, has been completed, so you can get a feel for where we are in the process because we're moving through. And by the way, the team includes the Chambers Group. It also includes AECOM and Catherine Padilla and Associates, and ultimately a team that has a lot of information and a lot of expertise within the area. What we've come up with, by the way, is the conclusion of those is these are the key elements in the County of Imperial that are going to affect our siting. Land use. In relationship to the urban areas, the cities, we have to deal that as a factor. We call them urban areas here, but if the city of Brawley, the city of Calexico, the city of El Centro, it could be the city of Westmoreland. So what is the distance? And they've wanted, in our communication with them, approximately a half-mile buffer from those cities. The military has become a real key issue. The military facilities and operations, the military influence areas. How many are all of you familiar with the military activities? No, I don't see a lot of hands. Do you know that this is one of the major stations really in the entire, in the United States for training for the warfare in the Middle East and Africa? This is where they have bombing. This is where the British come to train. This is where the Blue Angels are going to be performing very soon. So a meeting with the military the other day, they said, Brian, we're really concerned. For instance, we have one area where, we won't tell you where the area is, where we are basically experimenting and training on heat-seeking missiles. So we definitely don't want to see anything that's basically close to that area that may be generating heat, concentrated solar, because all of a sudden that missile is going to go in the wrong direction and you're not going to have any concentrated solar facility. The other thing, actually, it could be in relation to windmills, and because they do a lot of flight training in relationship to so these are factors that we have to take into consideration. Now, the other thing is, of course, with Congress looking at, well, where can I close bases? That's still an important part of the economy, so we need to balance those issues. Agricultural resources. For the County of Imperial also is one of the unique groups that has an agricultural element, so a separate element that is just as equal as that renewable energy. Now, the farmers For the most part, what I see is we really don't want Mooney, we don't want you telling us what to do. We really don't like all of these, but if this is the best way to lease my land and grow something, then it's just like in San Diego on the coast, they grow houses. Ultimately, balancing the interests of the farmers, at the same time, focusing on what should be preserved and what shouldn't be preserved. The biological resources, that fits into the Desert Renewable Energy Conservation Plan, because the flyway and the birds, this is extremely important. The endangered species habitats associated with some of the desert areas, and of course we have the burrowing owl in the agricultural regions. How are we balancing that, and what can be lessened? Now, obviously, one of the things you've heard throughout this conference is steering us towards the Salton Sea. And the Salton Sea does have some habitat conservation plans there. And we want to try to develop a program that, in essence, I won't say pre-approves from a full thing, but as much as we possibly can, work out with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Cal Fish and Wildlife, process that says this 50,000 acres that IID owns is going to require minimal processing through that area. So that's why this policy document that deals with the biological resources is going to be critical. Trying to take the onus of those studies away from you, the project developer or the pilot project developer, and put it within this system here. Aesthetic and visual resources. The Bureau of Land Management has mapped out sensitive visual resources in the region, and that's one of the reasons people come to the desert, is for that, literally the physical landscape that they're enjoying. And that's in association with the recreation. So we are looking at those. These seem to be the key factors when we start mapping them in the entire county that we basically have to deal with. I did the visual so I can kind of show you where they're popping up, at least with the information. All the data isn't on here. I believe this is land use. This is the kind of the urban areas or community planning areas. This is the military influence map, and you can start seeing some of the areas that popped out in relationship to military influence that we say we've got to, and it may be that we're developing policies, doesn't mean you can't put renewable energy projects in here, but you'll have to go through some sort of review in relationship to working with the military. And we also, by the way, don't necessarily want to just restrict things. Agriculture, this focuses on prime soils, and soils of statewide importance. You know, what are the areas that we really are going to try to conserve on a long-term basis going through that? And so this, you're starting to see the analysis we're going through. This is habitats in relationship to important sensitive ecological habitats. If I recall, this should be visual. And this is from the Bureau of Land Management, taking a look at the visual resources. So you can start seeing, if you start thinking about overlaying these sections in the GIS mapping, you're going to start coming up with areas of suitability. And then this also is parks and recreation. These are areas that have been identified by various agencies as sensitive from a parks and recreation standpoint. Now, what we're trying to, and if I'm missing something in this list, that's another thing I'm asking all of you to come to me. So what we're looking for is geothermal, wind, solar, concentrated solar, a deep solar pond, hypersaline brine ponds, and biofuels. And we're trying to learn, well, what does it take, when I say what does it take, to do a commercial level operation of this? Can I do it on 4 acres? Do I need 10 acres? Do I need 100 acres? And that's, so we're looking at that scale. Do I need 1,000 acres? Do I need some sort of a plant to go along with this particular option? So we aren't just thinking about that short of siting a project, we're actually thinking of how to then produce the product. Does the transmission line have to be adjacent to it? So these are the types of things that we're going through with each one of these categories as it relates to the geographic region that we're just kind of going through. Then what we're talking about, we really are grading each one. We're not saying all renewable energy is the same. And we're going through, okay, this land, based on the attributes we've heard from the renewable energy experts of what it takes to develop it, this land is highly suitable for wind. This land is highly suitable for geothermal, which is one of the easier ones because we have geothermal overlays. All the way down to this is highly unsuitable because there's too many conflicts. Let's go back to that concept of constraints and opportunities. There's too many constraints when we overlay in relationship to the bigger vision of what we're trying to achieve. We, by the way, do this within the mathematical. We actually use a statistical analysis, and we don't just have one person. We do it as a team. So it would be the county employees, the technical specialists, and we come and grade these together to ultimately come up with maps that we think would work. It's a very integrative process where we're going back and forth. And again, we also use a technical advisory committee in relationship to whether or not we're being accurate along these lines. This is showing us some of the attributes in relationship to, this is geothermal, for instance, where there's highly suitable geothermal. So that has to become, that's highly suitable to do it because that's where the resource is located. I know we're getting some additional information on some of these other areas. This, by the way, is maps that's showing wind power and taking a look at it. So we're looking at the attributes physical within the region of where's it going to be best to locate wind if wind is going to be. Now this, of course, is the easy one that everybody recognizes and identifies with, solar. Well, in reality, almost anywhere in Imperial County is going to be great for solar. Some are a little better than others, but ultimately that's, so we're looking at that level of detail, and these maps, by the way, are all from the state of California and the California Energy Commission, and we're using data from just about everywhere. We find that some of the key aspects in relationship to these areas, as I said, was the military, which we're just doing. This one is becoming very, very important, because ultimately, if we can get expedited permitting or no permit requirements through the state of California, Cal Fish and Wildlife, through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, through the EPA, then that actually is a whole level of layer. So that's why I'm going back to your original slide and kind of taking us to that aspect of exactly where we might start looking at some opportunities. And the other one is there a way we actually can create policies that, and we talked about it earlier, creating some pilot projects, particularly in the playas of the Salton Sea in relation to geothermal. Are there areas that we can do something with one of these new technologies? I met somebody last night that said, oh, I just bought some of the biofuel plants. Well, is that something that, because again, biofuel is another type of agriculture, so there's a situation where you see a combination of both of them. So this whole program that we are moving on, and I say that actually it's hope to have finished within a year, hope to have our reports done and start out for public review really by the late spring, early summer, is extremely important for all of you, I think, in relationship to creating that process. Tom also talked about the unions, finding ways to help work with the state legislature in improving the California Environmental Quality Act. Just like they're currently doing, Senator Steinberg, I believe, is working with the CEQA as it relates to redevelopment programs. Well, it may be that we need some additional lobbying in relationship to renewable energy, and particularly renewable energy where ultimately it becomes an economic component of any region, and particularly a region of more poverty. So where are we? Our next steps. As I said, we are going out to the public with this information. We actually are starting to write the policy program. We're going through it. We are going to write implementing ordinances, by the way. So that it's not just going to be the general plan, it's going to be the implementing ordinance. We are going to finalize the environmental baseline, confirm the renewable energy generation strategies, and that's one of the key things, and really also working very hard is also not just the generation but the transmission strategies. The transmission, we talked with the IID just this morning, and I know they're in coordination with my staff, of identifying where they are, not just today, where they're planned for in the future, and understanding the capacity, and understanding exactly what we're going to achieve out of it. As I said, prepare, by the way, the geothermal alternative energy will be renamed the renewable energy element, and then also completed the CEQA document. I can't emphasize enough how important that CEQA document is to develop something that ultimately, if there's an area that we find is really highly suitable for certain things that we want to try to reduce or eliminate, substantially minimize the environmental review required at the project level. As I said, I mentioned Tom DuBose talked about that a little earlier, and so those are extremely important things. We also need to get, and consensus is a wonderful word, but it's never really totally achievable. We want to try to understand the parties which, you know, have been somewhat of a difficulty for the county staff, for instance, the unions. And we have to be faced that there was some issue in relation to utilizing CEQA to stop projects for union contracts. It may be the agricultural interests. We need to get everybody, and I think that there's opportunities to get everybody on the same page, because what it's all about is finding ways that we ultimately can provide an economic base, provide jobs, and provide a better life for the citizens of Imperial Valley. Now, actually, that's our presentation. I'm going to bring Andy up, but here we were hoping that we might be able to generate. I also teach, and I'm an adjunct professor at the New School of Architecture, and I'm also teach lecture at UCSD and University of San Diego. And so if I don't see any questions, I might point and say, how about you? So let me turn it back to Andy.
As any good teacher would do, if you have a handout, you don't hand it out till the end. So I do have a little flyer here that I would like Sabio, since he's sitting down there, had the foolish idea to sit right down here in front to help me pass out. You might need one. Yeah, I need one. Yeah. This is just a little flyer on the first public workshop that we'll be holding. Brian mentioned the date, March 27th. It's at 3:30 in the afternoon up in Brawley, and at 6:30 down at the board chambers in El Centro. And this is only the first of many opportunities. Brian invited you to help us and participate in getting feedback and ideas. And this is designed to be, as a matter of fact, I think it's a requirement of the grant program under which that we are doing this, to maximize public outreach and participation in this whole project. And we know that we don't have all the answers. We know that there are a lot of smarter people than us that are involved in the energy business that can help us put this thing together in a way that will meet the needs of renewable energy development here in Imperial County, and also protect some of the assets and resources that we have here for long-term enjoyment. So I just wanted to mention a couple of things. Grab my notes here. And I think Brian did mention that for the timeline of this deal. We're really just basically getting started, but we are on a fairly short, as these things go, timeline. The terms of the grant currently require us to have this basically finished by spring, sometime in, I think it's the end of March of 2015. So we're a little more than a year away from having all this work compiled and put together, and then ready at that time for consideration. Of course, the EIR that Brian and his company or his colleagues are putting together will have to be circulated, and there'll be ample opportunity again for comment on that. And so then it will go to our board of supervisors, assuming that they accept our recommendations and our conclusions, to adopt the enabling ordinances to implement this new, or to put in place this new renewable energy update for our general plan. I just want to mention one other fact. Jim mentioned the number of megawatts that we're currently either producing or have permitted or in the process of permitting, and I think the total was what, a little 2,500, 2,300, something like that? The DRECP and the great planning experts up at the state of California at the Energy Commission and PUC, and this is in the DRECP planning document, envision 6,000 megawatts of renewables coming out of Imperial County. So if we are to meet those expectations, and that's their forecast of what they would need to meet the renewable energy needs of California going forward. So if you want to look at the opportunity that exists here in all these different technologies, that's a pretty good idea of what we're currently either now producing or have on the books, and where the state expects us to be when this whole the whole thing shakes out. So the delta, we're not even halfway there yet. If you look at that the way I would choose to look at it, there's still a tremendous opportunity out there for additional work to be done, projects to be developed, and I think that figure is what we're using in terms of identifying. The goal is to identify enough resources in terms of land here to theoretically at least produce that much power. So before I open it up for questions, I wanted to ask a couple follow-up questions. Jim and Brian both mentioned the role of the military here, but I don't know that we got any specifics. Jim, I'll ask you maybe to give a little bit of an update or some information on the joint land use study. You're the head guru of that from the county standpoint, and maybe tell people a little bit about what that has consisted of and how it will play into this process going forward.
Sure. Yeah, the county, in conjunction with the Department of Defense, is under...
You may want to pick it up.
Hold the whole time? Sorry about that. The County of Imperial, the cities of Imperial and the city of El Centro are combining up with, or joining up with, Department of Defense and the local military base to prepare what's called a joint land use study. The intent is to find the compatible uses between the two, or between the public and the military for future growth of the city, the two cities, the county, and the actual military base. The idea is to make sure that we don't infringe upon the military base or their operations. And like Andy had said and Brian had said, the operations include both in the air as well as in the ground, on the ground. So we have lots of training facilities here, not just the base itself.
As I recall, that's almost done, or
we're actually out. The draft document is out right now for public review. If any of you would like, you can come to the county or check the websites. Just call me up. You have all my contact
and that will be,
information.
as I recall, a series of recommendations to the county.
It's a study. It's not like what Brian is doing, where he's going to end up with a general plan and policy and stuff like that. This is a study. The idea is, once the study is done, then the resolution will occur and it'll be adopted as a study, and jurisdictions can then use that to help facilitate their next generation of updates for their general plans and their land use ordinances.
So it should be done in time, obviously, to feed into this process, from what my understanding is.
We'll beat Brian, yes.
Okay, Brian, I got one for you. You mentioned the geothermal overlay that we currently have, which was a result of the previous work that was done, and as you said, it's pretty resource specific. The geothermal overlay that we have now is pretty much meshes or follows the KGRAs in the county. Have you gotten far enough along? Are you envisioning, do you think, a overlay then to our zoning maps that would include for these different technologies, let's say a solar overlay and then maybe a biomass overlay or some other types of a land use designation other than the general plan to facilitate this?
Yes, actually, we are looking at potential overlays for these various types. There are areas we think that aren't as compatible, or types of renewable energies that may not be as compatible with others, and so it may be better to show these separate renewable energy, and there may be opportunity, just like we do with opportunity areas for economics. So that is one of the things, and we are looking at it probably becoming some form of an overlay zone that would be able to be applied to your zoning maps and the zoning ordinance. But that's one alternative. We really want to see also what the community is looking at in relationship to what they think works. As I said, we're talking to the other counties to make sure we are looking at something that may be even consistent throughout California.
Okay. Well, now the environmental the current geothermal overlay was done on this the current element was done with a master, I call it a master EIR, that some of the geothermal projects have kind of tiered off of in their permitting process, and I think I heard you talk about it. So the idea then with this EIR would then be to allow future projects to tier off of this document in terms of their permitting?
If at all possible, that's one of our goals. Ultimately, if we can identify areas where we think that it's highly suitable for that particular type of energy, and that ultimately we can identify also that it doesn't have the attributes from a biological perspective or from a visual perspective that we could have some sort of expedited environmental process that would actually be identified in some fashion in the environmental document. So yes, the idea would be developing a programmatic environmental report that it gets specific to address those areas that basically is going to encourage renewable energy projects.
Jim, you have any comment on that? Or?
Ditto.
Ditto.
We
All
hope
right.
we can achieve it.
As we are approaching our witching hour of 4:30, I'd open it up to any questions or comments you have out here in the audience. Yes, back there in the back.
That's a good question. Actually, the county has worked hard to try to convince the CEC to allow us to do that, and it's a continuing request. I know that they are considering a little bit about possibly taking some of the existing plants, and if they can generate more power, they're entertaining the notion of that, but to actually go out and build a 100 megawatt geothermal plant with county ordinances, we would of course welcome it greatly, but the CEC so far hasn't allowed us to do it.
Yeah, the existing state law, I think it's a little bit of confusion, something that I found out after I came work at the county and was in Sacramento lobbying on that very issue. The current law allows the CEC to delegate that authority to the counties up to 100 megawatts. They had chosen earlier to limit that to 50, so we really wouldn't have to do a whole lot other than convince the CEC this was the right thing to do. They wouldn't require any legislation to have them bump that up to the 100 megawatts. Now, you know, if you talk to the folks at Cal Energy, they were able to get their BlackRock 1, 2, and 3 projects approved through the CEC, and they felt it was you hear a lot of horror stories, but they felt that that was a worthwhile process for them. We certainly feel, as Jim said, that we're capable of doing that down here. There's also kind of a hybrid approach that's been used. I know when the IID built their peaker plant up there in Nyland, because it was a thermal plant that was more than 50 megawatts, it was under the purview of CEC. But they contracted with the county on an MOU to allow the county to share some of that review process. So that's another possible approach, would be to create some sort of an understanding with the CEC that we would participate in that, at least make things a little more local. I mean, having to go back and forth to Sacramento every time you have a hearing or something can get a little burdensome, but I think that hybrid approach might have some value in the future. But I think, and I do think this process that we're going into, the extent that we can keep our documents, our policy documents updated, might help convince them that that might be the right way to go. Any other questions out there? No? We gave you all the information right over here.
Sure. That's sure, no problem. The majority of the solar projects that we processed were on farmland. Some of the ones that were on farmland that hadn't been used as farmland for a long time, or of a poor quality of soil, seemed to have less constraints going through the process. Whereas other ones that were on prime farmland or state land of state significance, on the map that Brian had showed you, they depending on the site location and what they were, they became more problematic. That's part of the reason why we're going through this general plan update, to develop a better, a more comprehensive approach to where siting of solar makes more sense. Because, and I tried to, in my presentation, explain that we thought we were prepared based on our regulations that we had in place, and we had welcomed renewables for the past 20 years. We just didn't expect the typhoon that hit us, and so we were playing a lot of catch-up, just trying to stay ahead of the curve. And in doing that, site location was one of the major things that fell by the wayside because of the push from the federal government and the state government and even the Department of Conservation got involved in allowing solar on farmland, was so great that we essentially were on the ride with them. And so this whole next exercise is to get back ahead of it, and so we can have these meaningful dialogues before the next wave hits us.
No more?
Follow up on that. So, for example, what is the current, say, mitigation requirements for developing on farmland? And have you been in contact with the Department of Conservation proactively to maybe address their outdated farmland mapping, farmland maps that they use?
The Department of Conservation updates those maps every 2 years, and they do it with the input of the local jurisdictions. So in the case of the County of Imperial, they do it in conjunction with the Farm Bureau, the County Planning Department, the IID, and other agencies. And so that's how they do their cycle. As for their the mitigation for farming is primarily based on the concept that the Department of Conservation has determined solar to be a temporary use of the land and not a conversion of farmland. And so all of the mitigation measures are played out that direction, which in itself is an amazing progressive approach, because prior to 2010, if I were to come in with a conversion of farmland for any kind of use, it was extremely difficult to get farmland converted. And so all of a sudden we get these documents that are saying, hey, if you follow this path, you can do that. And one of the major things that they went with was the idea of using a SMARA. I don't know if any of you know what SMARA is, Surface Mining Reclamation Act, reclamation approach. That they say basically solar is good for X number of years. Once it is done, it needs to reclamate the property back to its prior self. So for example, one of the mitigation measures we would apply through the reclamation would be if you were a field that was growing a grass product. At the end, when you went to reclamate the site, the reclamation would include bringing back the delivery systems, retrenching the ground to put in the tile lines, and actually growing a couple crops in rotation to prove that the land is reclaimed. And that's very similar to the way how you would reclaim a sand and gravel pit or a mine, where you revegetate, you prove that it's done. So those are some of the ways we've approached it.
Just to add to that is those are the things that we're looking at putting in the general plan, putting in the environmental impact report, so it's done one time and you don't have to come back and do it again. That's exactly taking those policies and those programs that the Board of Supervisors and the staff have come up with and institutionalizing them to identify areas where we're going to minimize as much environmental review requirements particularly as possible, and also the encouragement. But that one concept of solar projects basically aren't taking away the soil, and the soil is the resource. And so if you're not taking away the soil, then ultimately you can say that's a compatible use as long as you follow a reclamation plan once you determine what the life of that project should be.
We got time for maybe one more. If there's any more questions out there. If not, just one final pitch for our workshop on the 27th. You all have the information there in front of you. We have made a deal with the casino here. They boxed up all the leftover cookies and desserts from today, and we're going to keep those for the workshop, and so you'll be able to enjoy those again when you come on the 27th. And we look forward to your input and involvement, and thank you for your attention today. Thanks.